The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when people in the valley started noticing something strange about Mara Collins' cabin. February in the northern mountains was never gentle. The cold arrived like a silent enemy, creeping into every crack of wood and stone. By this time of year, every home in the valley was surrounded by towering stacks of chopped firewood. Some families had piles taller than their fences, carefully covered with tarps and plastic sheets to protect them from the endless snow. Firewood meant survival. Without it, a house could turn into a frozen shell in a single night. But Mara Collins' cabin had no woodpile. The small cabin sat near the edge of the forest where the land dipped slightly toward a frozen stream. Snow covered the roof, the porch, and the surrounding ground in thick layers, turning the entire property into a quiet white blanket. Yet one thing was missing from the scene that everyone expected to see. There were no stacks of logs anywhere. No chopped wood leaning against the walls. No covered piles near the shed. Not even a few scattered pieces by the door. Just untouched snow. Still, thin gray smoke drifted steadily from the chimney. People began whispering about it at the town's only gas station, where locals often gathered to escape the cold and share news. "Someone drive by Mara's place today?" one man asked while warming his hands near the heater. "I did," another replied. Still no woodpile. The group exchanged confused looks. "That cabin should be freezing by now," an older farmer said. "You can't heat a place through February without cords of wood." Mara had moved to the valley the previous spring. She bought the old cabin from a retired hunter who decided to move south. Most people barely knew her. She kept to herself, spoke politely when spoken to, but rarely stayed long at gatherings or town events. During the summer, some neighbors noticed her working constantly around the property. She spent long days digging near the side of the cabin, hauling rocks, and moving soil in wheelbarrows. A few assumed she was planting a garden or building a root cellar. But no one ever saw her cutting firewood. When autumn arrived, families across the valley spent weeks chopping and stacking logs for winter. The sharp sounds of axes echoed through the forests every morning. Yet from Mara's land, there had been only silence. Now winter was in its harshest stage, and still her chimney kept smoking. The mystery slowly turned into concern. What if she runs out? A woman at the store wondered aloud one afternoon. Another man shrugged. Maybe she's got wood inside the cabin. But even that explanation didn't make sense. No house could store enough firewood indoors to last the brutal mountain winter. Finally, after another heavy snowfall one evening, a few curious neighbors decided to check on her. Their trucks crawled slowly along the snow-covered road until Mara's cabin came into view through the falling flakes. Warm golden light glowed through the frost-covered windows, and smoke still curled from the chimney into the darkening sky. Everything looked peaceful, but the ground around the cabin remained strangely smooth and empty. One of the men stepped out of his truck and walked carefully through the deep snow toward the side of the house. His boots crunched loudly with each step. That was when he noticed something unusual. Partially hidden beneath a thin layer of snow was a thick metal hatch set into the ground beside the cabin wall. He brushed the snow away with his glove and stared down at it. "Hey," he called to the others. "You might want to see this." The men stood around the metal hatch, brushing away snow with their boots and gloves. The steel surface was solid and weathered, with thick hinges on one side and a heavy handle in the center. It looked like something meant to stay sealed tight against the elements. "Why would someone put this here?" one of them muttered. Another knelt down and knocked on it with his knuckles. The hollow sound that echoed back made them exchange surprised looks. "There's space under there," he said. Before anyone could try opening it, the cabin door creaked open behind them. Warm yellow light spilled across the snow as Mara Collins stepped onto the porch. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She looked at the group calmly, as if unexpected visitors standing over a metal hatch in her yard was the most normal thing in the world. "Evening," she said. For a moment, no one spoke. They suddenly felt like children caught snooping where they shouldn't be. Finally, the oldest man cleared his throat. "Sorry to bother you, Mara. We were just checking to see if you were doing all right." Her eyes moved briefly toward the hatch before returning to them. "I'm doing just fine," she replied. One of the younger men gestured awkwardly toward the metal lid. "Mind telling us what this is?" For a second, Mara seemed to consider her answer. Then a faint smile appeared on her face. "Storage," she said simply. The answer only made their curiosity grow stronger. "Storage for what?" someone asked. Instead of responding immediately, Mara walked down the porch steps and brushed the remaining snow off the hatch with slow, deliberate movements. The metal surface glinted faintly under the pale winter light. "Come see," she said. She grabbed the thick handle and pulled. The hatch opened with a long creaking sound, revealing a dark opening in the ground. Wooden steps led downward into the earth, disappearing into shadow. A cool draft of air rose from below, but mixed within it was a smell every person in the valley recognized instantly. Fresh cut wood. The men looked at each other in confusion. Mara picked up a lantern hanging beside the door and lit it before stepping toward the opening. The warm glow illuminated the narrow staircase as she began descending slowly. "Watch your step," she called gently. Curiosity quickly overcame hesitation. One by one, the neighbors followed her down the wooden stairs. Their boots thudded softly against the steps, and the air grew slightly warmer as they moved deeper underground. When they reached the bottom, the lantern light spread across a wide chamber carved beneath the cabin. For a moment, no one spoke. The room stretched farther than they expected, its walls reinforced with heavy beams and stone supports. But it wasn't the size of the space that stunned them. It was what filled it. Stacks of firewood towered from floor to ceiling in long, perfectly organized rows. Each log had been cut evenly and carefully stacked, forming neat walls of wood that extended across the entire chamber. The smell of dry timber filled the air. One man slowly walked forward and ran his hand along a stack of logs, disbelief written across his face. "This can't be real," he murmured. Another man began counting the rows quietly, his eyes widening with every step. "Good Lord," he whispered. He turned toward Mara. "This has to be 30 cords of wood." Mara leaned lightly against one of the support beams, the lantern glow flickering across the stacked logs behind her. 32, she said calmly. The chamber was dry, warm, and protected by the thick earth surrounding it. Small ventilation pipes ran along the ceiling, allowing air to circulate while keeping moisture away from the wood. Above them, the winter storm continued to bury the valley in snow. But beneath the ground, Mara Collins had enough perfectly dry firewood to survive the coldest winter the mountains could bring. By the time the worst cold of February arrived, the entire valley was struggling. A brutal cold wave swept through the mountains with a force no one had expected. Temperatures plunged far below normal, and the wind howled across the frozen fields day and night. Snowstorms rolled through one after another, burying roads, fences, and woodpiles beneath heavy drifts. At first, most families believed they were prepared. Their stacked firewood had carried them through many winters before. But this storm was different. The snow fell faster and deeper than anyone had seen in years. Outdoor woodpiles disappeared under thick layers of ice and frozen snow. What remained above the surface quickly became soaked, then froze solid when the temperatures dropped overnight. Axes struck the frozen logs with dull, useless thuds. Even when people managed to dig through the snow, the wood burned poorly, spitting smoke instead of steady heat. Inside many homes, fires burned weakly while the cold crept slowly into the walls. But at the edge of the valley, Mara Collins' cabin stayed warm. Each morning she stepped outside into the quiet white landscape, brushed snow away from the metal hatch beside her cabin, and lifted it open. The heavy lid rose with a familiar creak, revealing the wooden staircase descending into the earth. Down below, her firewood remained perfectly dry. The underground chamber protected it from the freezing wind, snow, and moisture that ruined every outdoor woodpile in the valley. The thick earth surrounding the storage room kept the temperature stable, while the small ventilation pipes allowed air to circulate and keep the wood dry. Mara would climb down with a lantern, gather an armful of logs, and return to the surface. Within minutes, a steady fire would crackle inside her cabin. While the storm raged outside, warm light glowed through her windows each night. It didn't take long for word to spread. Soon, neighbors began arriving at her door. At first they came just to ask questions about the underground storage, still amazed by what she had built during the summer months when everyone else had assumed she was simply digging a garden cellar. But their visits quickly became more serious. One evening a young father knocked on her door, snow clinging to his coat and beard. His face looked tired and worried. "Our woodpile froze solid," he admitted quietly. "The kids can't sleep because the house is so cold." Mara didn't hesitate. She grabbed her lantern, opened the hatch, and climbed down the steps. When she returned, her arms were full of dry firewood. "Take this," she said. Soon sleds began sliding across the snow-covered valley, carrying bundles of Mara's wood to homes that desperately needed heat. Families who once barely spoke to the quiet woman now relied on her careful preparation to keep their homes warm through the bitter nights. Day after day, she shared what she had stored underground. One stormy evening an older farmer sat beside her fireplace, holding his hands near the flames while snow pounded against the cabin walls outside. He looked around the warm room slowly, then shook his head with a soft laugh. "All summer we watched you digging holes in the ground," he said. "Thought you were wasting your time." Mara added another dry log to the fire and watched the flames rise brighter. Sometimes the smartest way to survive winter wasn't about working harder once the cold arrived. It was about preparing quietly long before anyone else realized how harsh the winter would be.